Welcome everyone to Tales from the 90s, your retro time machine back to my favorite time period, the 90s. Last week we went to the very beginning of the 90s, January of 1990. This week we're going to go towards the middle. We're going to go to December of 1995. We're getting ready for my favorite year of 96. But first we got to get to the end of December, so let's go.
Viewer warning. The following program contains material that may be too intense for some viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
Where every tale begins. Tales from the crypt, marathons, wrestling wars and morning yawns. Play kickball in the street, man, those days can't be beat. Tales from the 90s never die.
Yeah, we're working our way through this episode 71. Been doing this for a long time. Still love doing it. Put a lot of effort into the research to, for all the facts and stuff. But I do like to give, all my personal memories and stuff. And, not just like I'm reading. Like, you can go to Wikipedia to find all this stuff out if you want to, or somewhere else, if you want to find out, just facts. I try to put my own personality into it, what little I have. But anyway, do want to mention I do a bonus Yes, I do a lot. But I do a bonus episode once a month. It can cover pretty much any topic. I'm going to do, since I'm a huge wrestling fan, being WrestleMania season next month, well, right now, but next month is WrestleMania. So on April 3rd, which is the first Friday of the month, I'm going to put out my 19th bonus episode. This one is my top 10 WrestleManias of all time, just ranking out of the 41 that have happened already. My top WrestleManias of all time. I think 41. Or they already done 42 already? I don't think so. No, I think this year's 42. Anyway, just ranking them on my personal preferences. Music, on the music front, I just put out a single, just came out yesterday. It's called Where'd the Country Go? It's kind of my commentary on today's modern music. I know I've already done one like that, but this one I actually like better than the first one I did. But anyway, that's out now. You can check it out anywhere, streams, YouTube, wherever. Anyway, we're going to get into this podcast. We're going to go to December 1995. If you've never seen it before, I pick a random month and year and talk at length about the stuff that was going on that month. I try to limit it to that month, although when I'll talk about some Christmas memories in a little bit. They're not exactly even 1995, but they're somewhere around there. You get all kinds of memories. You don't remember exactly what year some things happened in. Some things you can. Something will happen, and it'll be like, oh yeah, that happened, and then this happened. But sometimes it's just like general, like, it could have been anywhere from 93 to 97, But anyway, I'm trying to focus most of this on December of 1995. Of course, being Christmas time, I'll definitely be talking about some Christmas stuff. But first I want to get into sports, and of course, the major sport going on at the time is football. The NFL regular season had just wrapped up, and they started the first round of the playoffs by the time this month was over. And I want to kind of I'll be looking at my screen. If you've never watched before, I do have the facts, typed out, because, some of the stuff I can't remember off the top of my head. I try, but it don't always work. But anyway, I want to give the teams that did make the playoffs. For the AFC, we got the Bills, the Colts, Dolphins, Steelers, Chiefs, and Chargers. Back then it was 6 teams that made the playoffs. Now it's 7. They modified it a little bit. But for the NFC, it was the Cowboys, Eagles, Packers, Lions, 49ers, and Falcons. Because, of course, you can't have a 90s... You can't do a 90s podcast, talk about football, and it'd be strange if the Cowboys and the 49ers didn't make the playoffs. I need to do some research to see if they were in every year. If they weren't, it was close, because it seemed like they were always there, if not winning the Super Bowl. Trust me, the 49ers beat the Bengals twice. Not in the 90s, but beat us twice in the Super Bowl. Yeah, my favorite team is the Bengals. I'm from Cincinnati. If you've never watched this before, huge Cincinnati fan, so my team's always the Bengals and the Reds, as crappy as they are. But anyway, speaking of the Bengals, we finished tied for second at a record of 7-9, which wasn't bad for 90s Bengals. Trust me, 90s Bengals were the absolute dog craps. I try not to cuss on here, if you can tell. But yeah, we finished 7-9, which should be considered a victory for the way our team was. But one funny note, in the final game of the season, the Giants hosted the Chargers. And this is known as the snowball game because New York Giants fans were, their team wasn't making the playoffs, I don't believe. Yeah, they weren't making the playoffs. So they had nothing to celebrate. And it snowed, so they decided to start throwing snowballs onto the field. Well, what was the figure? Almost 200 people were ejected and 15 people were arrested on this day. But yeah, like I said, the playoffs had just started. The first round is called the wild card round. In that round, the Colts beat the Chargers, the Bills beat the Dolphins, the Packers absolutely killed the Falcons, and the Eagles beat the Lions in a really high-scoring game that was still a blowout, 58-37. You think you score 37 points in a game, oh, you're definitely winning. Nope, not when the other team scores 58. But, of course, the next month would be Super Bowl 30, and in that Super Bowl, as the Cowboys beat the Steelers. So I'm glad the Steelers lost, and as you see, of course, the Cowboys. Nowadays, it's always the joke I see on Facebook. This is the year for the Cowboys, making fun of their fans, saying this is the year. But, because it's hard to believe it's been 26 years since the 90's. But it's to me, it seems like just a couple years ago that the Cowboys were like one of the ultimate best teams. They were called America's team. And now they're just like the butt of the joke because they always just miss the playoffs or get killed in the playoffs in the first round or something. But there was a time when the Cowboys were certainly no joke. But these days it's a joke, and like I said, anybody under 25 wouldn't understand any of that. Yeah, that's why you have a perspective of a long life. You get to see things. It's weird, like now, like the way the Cowboys are. I mean, the 49ers have been good the past few years. Despite having injuries, they've still been really good. But the Cowboys have really fallen off when they used to be like the ultimate. But anyway, some things also happened during this season. Not this month, but during this season. It was the first year for the expansion teams, the Carolina Panthers and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Also, the two teams that were in LA moved. The LA Rams moved to St. Louis. Of course, they're back there. I think they're the Los Angeles Rams now again. Yeah, they beat the Bengals in the Super Bowl a few years ago. And then the Raiders moved back to Oakland because they were originally the Oakland Raiders, then the LA Raiders, then the Oakland Raiders. Now they're the Las Vegas Raiders. And I think the San Diego Chargers are now the Los Angeles Chargers. So LA's got two teams again somehow. But also, this was the final year of the Cleveland Browns, the original Cleveland Browns. The next, there was that big, huge thing where the owner wanted to move the team to Baltimore, and the NFL let him. But they said that, because there was such an outcry from the Cleveland fans, because, Cleveland had been, as crappy as a team they've been for years and years and years. They were, one of the very first teams. They've been in the league longer than the Bengals for sure. But, there was such an outcry that the NFL said, okay, you can move the team to Baltimore, but, and they were getting a new name, the Baltimore Ravens. But you're basically like starting over. You're not getting the history of the Browns. You're not getting the name. And by 1999, which had happened in 99, Cleveland would get the Browns back, which they did. So that's kind of weird how that happened. But yeah, that not all teams like that. Like the Hoiston. I combined Houston and Oilers there. The Hoistons, the Houston Oilers moved. By the way, if you're not from the United States and familiar with American football, I'm sorry if none of this is making sense at all. I'm trying, I try to, because I got a lot of people that actually watch in other countries, so I try not to keep it, talking about just American stuff, but, how else am I going to talk, because that's my experience, I can't, over in, this place, this happened, I remember it because I don't remember it. As a kid, you barely remember the stuff going on in the news except the big stuff, Of course, I know, having fun here, but not to bring it down, but, the Oklahoma City bombing was a big thing, and I'm sure everybody knew that in the world, and I found out through one of my friends on here that the O.J. Simpson case wasn't just big in America, it was big everywhere. But, yeah, like I said, I try to, to explain things, but if you don't know anything about American football, or about the teams at least, but there are a lot of people over there in other countries that do know about it, because, they have the few games over in Europe during the regular season now because it's become popular over there. Just like what we call soccer here, everywhere else calls football, has become really popular here in America, and it was originally, only popular in European and other countries like, South America. It's become really popular here. But let's see, I think that's all I had on the football. But one note of football for college football. My favorite team, the Ohio State, it is the Ohio State. That's what we refer to it as. But our running back, Eddie George, which went on to have a big career with Tennessee Titans, he was named, he won the Heisman Trophy, which is the biggest award you can win in college football. And I know where I was going. I was talking about the Houston Oilers. They moved to Tennessee, became the Tennessee Titans. They kept the history of the franchise, but didn't keep the name. Whereas, like I said, the Browns got to keep their history and their name, and Baltimore just became a new team. And of course, Baltimore has been hugely successful over the years since then, and Cleveland's done nothing. So, I'm sure they're not crying over losing that name. But anyway, talk a little bit about music. I was always, as you can tell by my music I put out now, a huge country fan. Didn't listen to pop music at the time, but there was a song that was, and I don't even know the song because, like I said, that's how little I listen to pop music. By little, I say none. The only pop music I would have heard is if somebody happened to play it in school, which, it's not like today you can play stuff off your phone. Back then you had to have headphones, so it's not like I would have heard it off somebody. And, I wasn't watching MTV. But anyway, huge number one song that was number one for all of December, all of January the next year, and February, and 2 weeks of March. For 16 weeks total was One Sweet Day, a collaboration between Mariah Carey and Boyz II Men, which were both notorious for having huge runs at number one throughout the 90s. So, they combined 16 freaking weeks at number one. That's huge. Over on the American Country Countdown, which I listen to, of course, George Strait had a huge song with Check Yes or No. That's one of his signature songs. Love that song. Just such a sweet song. It was number one for 1 week, and then also 3 weeks back in November for 4 weeks. And I've talked before, if you have a multi-week number one in the country charts, it was, during this time it was huge because that didn't often happen. It was so competitive. It was rare to have more than 1 week, especially 4 weeks. And then the next number one was Alan Jackson's Tall, Tall Trees. It was number one for 2 weeks. Kind of a funny song. It was originally a Roger Miller song, which, if you don't know him, he's mostly known for King of the Road. But he does a whole lot of, silly songs. Not parodies, but just silly country songs. But at the same time, they still have, they're not taken as a joke. It's just, if, look into Roger Miller, he's hilarious, like I said, not in overly funny, I'm trying to be funny, it's just Roger Miller. That's the only way I can explain it. The final number one of the month and the year was Aaron Tippin's That's As Close As I'll Get to Loving You. Really good song there, too. And one final note on music. It was December 31st, the last day of the year, that Great American Country, GAC, the channel became, it was born. It went on the air. And I didn't get to watch this for a couple years just because it wasn't on our cable system that we had at the time, when we had cable. But I remember watching it a lot once I did because, CMT was the big video channel. And, of course, TNN, which was became the national network. It was the Nashville network. But, GAC, really became CMT's competitor. TNN wasn't showing a ton of music videos. They were doing a whole lot of original programming. They would show, I remember watching, they'd have dancing at this saloon in Nashville. They have, an hour a day. I can't think of the name of that right now. It's escaped me, but I used to watch it all the time where they would, it'd be an hour, they'd play music and they'd be, showing people dancing. And they have primetime interview shows with, big stars, and they get on there and perform, and they, that type of stuff. And then later it became mostly fishing and stuff, the country lifestyle, not the country music. And then, of course, they rebranded to the national network where they tried to, and they cut all the country music stuff off. But anyway, GAC, like I said, is a great channel. I love when they had the GAC Classic, when they would show the stuff from, in the early 2000s is when I was watching this. They showed the stuff from the 90s and the 80s on GAC Classic. But yeah, great channel. I don't know for sure if they're still going today. They might be. But I almost guarantee they're not showing music videos. Almost no channel shows music videos anymore. Pretty much, if they do make music videos, you go to YouTube to watch them pretty much now. But at this time, I want to look at the Nickelodeon lineup. I just chose a random day of the month. It happened to be December 14th, which was a Thursday. So I'm going to go look at the Nickelodeon lineup. And of course, we always start on these with Nick at Night at midnight. So we got the Bob Newhart Show, the Lucy Show, one of my mom's favorites, Dragnet. We got the Munsters. I love the freaking Munsters. I would, there would be a time, if I wasn't watching Mr. Wizard's World at 6 in the morning when we had cable, or no, they were both on cable. Well, I guess they took something off. But anyway, I was either watching Mr. Wizard's World at 6 in the morning getting ready for school, or I was watching the Munsters when they had them on TBS at 6 in the morning. But here on TV Land, it was 1:30, and I guarantee you, 1:30 in the morning in 1995, when I was 11, I was sleeping. I think I was 11 at this time. Forgot to mention that. No, I just turned, yeah, that's right. I was 11, but I turned 12 because December's my birthday month. I get the last month of the freaking year, so whenever I try to figure out my age, I always got to remember that I only turned the age of that year for literally 7 days, or 8 days. Yeah, 8 days, because December 23rd is my birthday. So I don't get much of a birthday year that year. Once it's over, it's over. But anyway, back to the lineup. We had the Munsters, like I said. Then paid programming for a half hour. Then Taxi, Welcome Back Kotter, Dick Van Dyke Show, Bob Newhart Show again, Lucy Show again, Dragnet. They're just repeating now. Then at 5:30, Nick News, which I never really watched. It was made for kids, but still, kids are like, it's got news in the title. Some of them watched it, a lot of us didn't. And then at 6 in the morning, we got Bullwinkle's Moose-O-Rama, which is, of course, just a Nickelodeon repackaging of the classic Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoon. Love that. And all the little shorts in it. And then Wienerville, the weird puppet show hosted by Mark Wiener. Yes, that's his real name. And no, it didn't have anything to do with wieners. Save that for Ren and Stimpy. Ooh, then at 7, we got Gumby. I love Gumby. I know it's a classic claymation cartoon. I don't know what else to call it. Show. But I love it. And then we got Beetlejuice, the animated series, which I actually liked. I didn't really care for the movie. Never seen the sequel, but I loved the animated series. Then we got Looney Tunes on Nickelodeon, because of course you gotta have the Looney Tunes. And then we start Nick Jr. with Rugrats, one of the 3 original Nicktoons. Classic, everybody knows Rugrats. The Busy World of Richard Scarry, based on the Richard Scarry's books. Richard Scarry was his name, they're not scary. Great cartoon about like this city with that's busy, and it's full of like animals, like the animals are the people basically. And then we got Muppet Babies, all-time classic. The Muppet Show, which I never really cared for. The only really Muppet property I like is the Muppet Babies. I don't care for the Muppet Show or any of the Muppet movies. Sorry, just not my thing, but I love the Muppet Babies. Then we got Allegra's Window, classic Nick Jr. show there. It was one of the final Nick Jr. shows that I had watched. Along with what followed it was Gullah Gullah Island, which I like more than Allegra's Window. Learned a lot from Gullah Gullah Island. Then we got Rupert, which I remember a little bit of. I didn't watch a ton of that. Then we got Richard Scarry again. Eureka's Castle, sort of like the Muppets, but I don't know if it's made for me, but it was more my thing than the Muppets. Papa Beaver's Storytime, which I never really watched. Gumby again. The Adventures of Tintin, which was like a French, it was English, dubbed from a French cartoon about this like newspaper reporter that's like solving crimes. Like he's a kid with his dog, and it's not Rin Tin Tin like everybody thinks, but it's Tintin. Then we got Looney Tunes again, Beetlejuice, Muppet Babies, then Alvin and the Chipmunks, that classic 80s 90s cartoon. The Alvin and the Chipmunks and the Dennis the Menace cartoon themes always play through my head. Those theme songs are so catchy. Then we got Tiny Toon Adventures, which is classic part of the whole Looney Tunes universe, but its own separate thing. Of course, Pinky and the Brain came from Tiny Toon Adventures, but Tiny Toon Adventures is so good. Then we got Legends of the Hidden Temple, one of my favorite game shows of all time. Where you gotta, teams of two kids where they gotta win these challenges and get to the very end, where you got 3 minutes to run through this what's it called? It's not a jungle or a haunted house. It's just this, all this stuff you got. I don't even know exactly, the temple, I guess you call it. I was trying to think of the name, what it's called. Legends of the Hidden Temple. You got to run through and find the object you're looking for in like 3 minutes, and there's temple guards that ground you. Yeah, they ground the kids. They grab them, and you got tokens you can trade by winning in the games. Really great game show. If you've never actually seen Legends of the Hidden Temple, look it up on YouTube. It's also on Paramount Plus if you have that. But really great game show there. I'm assuming if people are watching this, they were around back then and probably seen it. But just in case, just in case someone's like, I want to see what the 90s are about. There's probably better people than me to explain it. But anyway, then we've got Rugrats again, and then Doug, another one of the original Nicktoons. Clarissa Explains It All, one of my favorite shows. It's sort of a teen show. And it was revolutionary for the time because it was normally, a girl show, as you want to call it, was popular with everybody. It wasn't just, usually shows with girls as the lead would be marketed for, the girls, and not a lot of boys would watch it. But Clarissa was changed that all because everybody watched it, because she was like so cool. She was like, she appealed to the girls because she was so cool. She appealed to the guys because, if you didn't have a crush on her, you were still like, man, she would be an awesome friend to have, that type of thing, A wholesome show like they don't have these days. Teen shows these days are just disgusting, and I'll leave it at that. At least some of the stuff they do in them, and they're supposedly supposed to be under 18. Like I said, I'll leave it at that. I'm looking at that freaking HBO Euphoria crap show. Marketed like it's for teens, and they show all kinds of nasty. Anyway, sorry, I said I'd leave it, and I'm going to leave it. We're going to move on. We got Wienerville again. I just talked about that, but all this disgusting stuff. And then next is Wienerville, but it's not disgusting. Anyway, and then of course we get back to Nick at Night at 8:30 because you got to get the kids to bed and the parents watching Nick at Night. We got I Dream of Jeannie, I Love Lucy, Bewitched, my wife's favorite show, one of them. Mary Tyler Moore Show, Taxi, Welcome Back, Kotter, and then we end the night with the Dick Van Dyke Show. So yeah, definitely a lot of stuff that I would have watched there on the Nickelodeon lineup. And then I do want to mention the TGIF lineup, which was of course ABC's Friday night. Always like the place to be if you didn't have something to do on Friday night. Normally I wasn't allowed watching TV because of my stepdad from hell, Marky Foe, which I've talked about him many times. So I wasn't always watching this, but most of the shows on TGIF that I liked, I actually ended up watching in syndication more than on Friday nights. But anyway, the number one show on TGIF was Family Matters. They were in season 7, so definitely a well-established show there. Urkel is what pretty much made that show. I mean, it was a good show anyway. But until Urkel appeared in, the middle of the first season, I don't think it would have had as much longevity. Is that a word? Longevity? That doesn't sound right. Wouldn't have been around longer, okay? Leave me alone with my English here. I can barely English. I definitely can't do any other languages. But anyway, the second show was Boy Meets World. They were in season 3. They were really hitting their stride at this time. Topanga went from the weird character to like to being with Corey, and they really started getting their relationships down to where Sean was this they're leaning less on like the trailer park the funny haha like where they would show his family, they'd all be in the mob and stuff like this, but really kind of going from the funny hi you live in the trailer park to the the serious this kid lives in poverty. His best friend, is middle class and has a good life, has all his family there with him. really kind of getting that. But the way I say it like that makes it sound like it's some like documentary or something. But it was really a good comedy. But they had a lot of moments in it that were really serious. But they didn't it wasn't ever in like a here's today's lesson type thing. It was you'd get a lesson in it, but it would flow through. The best shows I found, for kids and stuff, have all that have messages like that, have always been able to work it into the story where it's not like hitting you in the face like today's message is. It's all it all works in to where you feel like you're being entertained, but not being taught to or something. But anyway, the third show was Step by Step. They were in season 5. They were really doing pretty good. Of course, not a spinoff, but created by the same people who created Family Matters. And then the final show is Hanging with Mr. Cooper season 4, which I don't have a ton of memories of this. I know I watched it a few times, and I liked it when I watched it, but I just don't have a ton of memories other than Cooper was I believe he used to play in the NBA, but then he became a basketball coach, and I think maybe a teacher at the school. I can't remember exactly, but I know he was at least the basketball coach there. But he used to play in the NBA on the show. But I do want to now, since it being Christmas-themed episode, December, talk about some of the top toys of the Christmas season of 1995. One of the biggest was probably Beanie Babies. Real simple, cheap things. The little filled with the little bean thingies. They're not exactly beans, but that's what they called them. Just like little stuffed bears, and they all had like different personalities or colors or themes, and they went on to become hugely popular. And there was the whole thing then was, these are going to be worth something someday, and people were putting them up. And I think when I looked it up a couple years ago, they're hardly worth anything these days. I think it's because so much hype was put into these are going to save these for your future. They're going to put your kids through school. You're going to be able to buy a house with these Beanie Babies in 20 years. I think so much emphasis was put on that it made it not worth anything. I think if they would have just existed and nobody made such a big deal about it, I think they would have been. It was almost like they were shooting themselves in the foot, like, yeah, these are going to be worth a lot. Not. But at the time, they were still a popular toy. And the Sony PlayStation was just released in September of this year, so it had been out for 2 months. And of course, we all now today know the impact that Sony and PlayStation's had on the gaming world. At this time, there was, nobody knew. It was a new game system, unless you're Nintendo or a Sega back then, new game systems didn't seem to fare too well. So time would definitely tell. But at this time, you could really see, that PlayStation was going to be a contender. Of course, they were using discs where, Nintendo was using cartridges, and can't talk. Sega had just come out with the Sega Saturn earlier in the year, and of course, they'd experimented with CDs, the Sega CDs. So it wasn't like they were against the CDs. It's just they'd put so much out, and Sega was the problem. They put so much out at once. And it was because of the people from Sega of Japan that were pressuring the Sega of America people to, put this out now. And, they just released the 32X and the Sega CD. And now they're wanting to put out the Sega Saturn when people are still using the Genesis. So no wonder there's a wonder the Sega Saturn didn't do as well. But it was also the price point. Sega Saturn cost $399 for a game system that most people didn't want because they had the Genesis, when the PlayStation came out for $299. So it's $100 less, plus they're putting all this promotion into it. It's no wonder that Sony's still around and Sega is not making game systems. The Dreamcast was amazing, one of my favorite game systems of all time. It probably is my favorite game system of all time. But it was too little too late. Sega of Japan had screwed Sega of America so much that they screwed the whole company at that point. But anyway, there was still some popular toys around this time. And of course, those little Tiger Electronics handheld games that were not very good at all, but it seemed like everybody had one. I had a Power Ranger one. They even had Sonic, 2 Tiger handheld games. Little LCD screens with the little buttons, and you barely tell what was going on the screen. They could have just put the same game in every one, and people wouldn't have understood it. And They were still on the original Game Boy. They hadn't come out with Game Boy Color yet, but they were putting out different colored versions of Game Boy. You know, they're like, all these new colors, you know, red. You could get. They're like, you could get a color for every outfit you own. Like everybody can afford a new Game Boy a month. Well, some families probably could. But they also had the Sega Game Gear, which was their handheld. But they just come out with the Sega Nomad, which is a really cool concept. It played Genesis games, for one. You know, but you know the battery used on that had to be bad. The Game Gear was notorious, and Game Boy were notorious for you going through batteries. I guarantee the Nomad went through them. But not only did you could play Sega Genesis games on it, but you could also actually connect it to your TV and play it on there too. So it's basically a Sega Genesis in your hand, which was at the time was revolutionary. Nowadays, you know, you can get on your phone and get an emulator and play all the Sega Genesis games all you want. But back then, if you'd have told, you know, we got these little cell phone thingies, people would not believe the capabilities they have back then. I know I wouldn't. If I would have been like, okay, yeah, what is this, Star Trek? What's next? We're gonna go up into the sky. But yeah, this, you know, a lot of great toys for Christmas season, and like I said, no wonder Sony PlayStation won out over the Saturn. But since we're talking about Christmas, I do want to talk about some funny Christmas memories. Just some quick things. Don't want to drag the podcast out too long. I don't know if I've talked about these before. I may have. But I know this one is when I was... let me look again, because I can't remember what grade I was in at this time. 6th grade. So this may have been this year. In fact, I think it was. But, you know, back in school, they would have... Of course, they would have the shopping for your family, you know, where you'd go in and you buy these, like, overpriced things if you had the money. Normally, I was just looking. There was a year or two I got some actual money to buy stuff for my family. And I think one year the teachers gave me some money because they felt sorry for me. But... besides that, they would also, some schools would actually have Santa Claus come. You know, you can sit on, you know, because, you know, elementary school. If anybody's kids actually watching, Santa is real, people. But anyway, they'd have Santa come to the school. And my brother Josh, I don't know if he was making this up, exaggerating, or this really happened, but I could see it happening. He said this Santa was green, okay? Not just like he had green teeth. He said he had a green beard and like, he was just talking like this homeless, drunk, green Santa. Like, I don't know what was going on. Like I said, I don't know for sure that was true or not, but I could also see it at the same time, too. Apparently, this guy would have made bad Santa look like a saint. But I've talked before a lot about memories at my granny's house. I did a whole bonus episode of the experience at Christmas time in her house. But one of the things in particular that always pops into my head when I'm thinking about Christmas is the one year, it would always be, it wasn't just, you know, me and my brothers, my mom, and Marky Foe, which I told before about him eating my granny's salad, which is like, you know, she used Miracle Whip as the dressing, which I always thought was like weird. Like, I'd never tried it because I was like, it's Miracle Whip. It's supposed to go on sandwiches. Didn't, you know, not realizing the original, and even says on the bottle, the original use of Miracle Whip is a salad dressing. But anyway, Marky Foe ate so much food that he'd literally sit at the table and unbutton his pants right in front of everybody, just so he had more room. But anyway, it wasn't just us and, you know, my granny and Papa Jesse. It was also our cousins, Jessica, Mallory, and Adam, you know, from my mom's sister. And our Aunt Wilma, and I would just even then do stuff to try to make people laugh. But I remember Beverly Hillbillies was on TV, so I was sitting there looking at the Mr. Potato Head. I remember all it had was glasses and feet, no eyes, no ears or hands or nothing, just the glass and the feet. You know, so, and Granny was on, you know, not my Granny, but Granny from Beverly Hillbillies was on there, you know, screaming at Jethro about something, and I think he like knocked her glasses off, and, you know, so I picked up the Mr. Potato Head glasses, put them on my face, and was trying to talk like Granny from Beverly Hillbillies. I was like, I put on my glasses, and I would run around the room, and they were like dying laughing, like, you know, that was like my peak of being a comedian or something, was having all my brothers and my cousins dying laughing from this stuff. But that's just always our joke. Put on my glaciers. If I have a funeral, I want... my dad had those... my dad's funeral... I'm laughing talking about my dad's funeral. It's not funny, but this part was... my sisters had him dressed up... had the glasses with the big nose and the big mustache. At my funeral, I want Mr. Potato Head yellow glasses on. I swear. But also, there was one year that Mom and Marky Foe played a joke on us. Don't remember if it was this year or not. It might have been. But they're like, we're going to give you your big presents first, because normally, the big things save for last. We're like, oh boy, this must be really big. They can't even keep it a secret. So and they were small presents, so I was thinking, this is our big present. I wonder what this is. So we both opened them at the they had them both open at the same time, and it turned out these little baby dolls. And me and Josh start looking at each other. We think it's a joke. We look at them; they're not laughing. Me and Josh both start crying, like literally crying like babies, because we got baby dolls and we thought they were serious. And then Travis starts laughing. He was apparently in on it. They all start laughing. But for a minute, me and Josh were literally crying, thinking we got baby dolls for Christmas, and that was our big present. Like, if that's our big present, what else is going with them? Their clothes, a stroller? But yeah, like, they play. I don't know how they kept from laughing at that, because the looks on our faces had to be horrified, and then we start crying, and then that makes them start laughing. Maybe we deserve the baby dolls for crying like babies. All right, now we got a couple of things to talk about for TV. One debut and one show that's ending. The debut was Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, the animated series, of course, based on the popular Jim Carrey movie. Both of them. I didn't really care for the second one as much as I did for the first, to be honest. I don't know why. I loved the first movie, but I don't think I've ever went back and rewatched the second movie since the 90s. But anyway, this series is supposed to take place after that. It was on CBS for 2 seasons, and then moved over to Nickelodeon for their last season. So it was 3 total seasons and 41 episodes. And then the show that was ending was Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? Love this show. It was on PBS. It was 5 seasons and 295 episodes, because it was a weekly game show. And it was, of course, based on the CD, PC, CD-ROM, whatever you want to call it, games. The Carmen Sandiego games, where you got to track down Carmen Sandiego's the thief, and you got to track her all over the world. Well, in this, it was like a game show, and you got to try to figure out where she is, or, some of her, people that work with her on the contestants on the game show. And the theme song of that was so catchy. But yeah, it ended in December of 1995. And we're talking about books now. There's a couple books that came out. Goosebumps came out with a book number 38 called The Abominable Snowman of Pasadena. This is when Goosebumps books, to me, started getting silly and just kind of away from what they originally were, really, and where I kind of stopped reading them. I was in 6th grade for one, so I was getting older and, reading older things. Well, I wasn't really reading much at the time, but if I was, it probably... I probably would have moved on anyway, but, the Abominable Snowman of Pasadena just seems like... And also at the time, the Goosebumps series had just started, so R.L. Stine was working with that, and then starting other Goosebump books, and it seems like he just, didn't put as much emphasis on the stories, and they were starting to get, and also by the time it was the 38th book, so, it was kind of, the series is starting to get hot, and Goosebumps was going to become bigger than ever, but at the same time, the books were kind of, the quality wasn't as good. I'm not saying it wasn't, he was phoning it in, but, maybe a little bit he was. But they also came out with the Give Yourself Goosebumps book number 3, which is like the Choose Your Own Adventure books. This one's Trapped in Batwing Hall, and I recently read this. Different things that happen in this book. You can turn into a bat or a vampire, and you got to try to escape, choosing one of 2 different things. And of course, all the stories branch off from there, and what you choose, determines what's going on. So like I said, I'm reading through that series from first to end, and this was the 3rd one. So like I said, recently, last couple months I read that. Not too much to talk about now, but I do want to talk about wrestling, and this one's going to be a little bit lengthy just because there seemed to be so much going on in the month of December. Of course, 1995, was kind of a down period in wrestling, but there's still a lot going on. I have a lot to read off here from ECW. Of course, at this time, ECW was not doing pay-per-views yet. They were doing their, what was called their super cards, where they had their big events, and that's where they would take, what happened at those events and build their TV shows around it, pretty much. But they had ECW December to Dismember from December 9th from the ECW Arena. And this is the first ever December to Dismember. And they wouldn't have another one again until the WWE had their own in 2006 when they brought ECW back. The only ECW pay-per-view they had that wasn't the one-night stand pay-per-views. But it was terrible. But anyway, this is the first ever one. Parts of this event would air over 2 episodes of their TV show called Hardcore TV. Some matches that happened. The Sandman with Woman defeated Steve Austin. The brief time Steve Austin was in ECW before he went to WWF. And ECW Heavyweight Champion Mikey Whipwreck in a 3-way dance to win the title. And of course, 3-way dance in ECW is, you heard a triple threat for WWE where, they do too much, I think, where the first person to pin wins. Well, in a 3-way dance, it's elimination style. So you start with 3 people. One person gets pinned, they're out, and the other 2 left, will fight until there's one left. I actually prefer those, especially in video games. I prefer those because if you do that, the computer will usually let you get the pin if it's eliminations, if you're trying to pin another person. But if it's a triple threat, the other computer is like zoomed in, they're going to break up the pin unless you got them like dead on the outside or something. But anyway, that's video games. The main event was this very convoluted thing. It was called, I've talked about this match type before, the Ultimate Jeopardy Steel Cage match. This was a huge one. It was a 5-on-6 handicap match where everybody had something on the line. In the match was Tommy Dreamer, the Public Enemy, and the Pitbulls, and they won against Raven, the Heavenly Bodies, the Eliminators, and Stevie Richards. And in the match, Tommy Dreamer pinned Stevie Richards. And the stipulation, if Richards lost, was he had to be locked in the cage with all 5 members of Tommy Dreamer's team for 5 minutes. Well, being ECW, doing ECW things, Raven had actually handcuffed the Pitbulls and the Public Enemy to like the apron so they couldn't get in the ring. So it was just Tommy Dreamer and Stevie Richards instead of everybody. And then all Raven's team runs back in and starts beating up Tommy Dreamer for the 5 minutes until Sandman comes out with the Singapore cane and runs them away. But like I said, everybody had something on the line. Whoever pinned Raven would get his valet, or whatever you want to call her, Beulah McGillicuddy for a week, which of course, this is before she went to Tommy Dreamer, and of course in real life they're married and have been since then. Let's see, what else went on? Tommy Dreamer, if he'd lost, he would have gotten his head shaved, which would have looked funny. The Public Enemy would have been forced to wrestle each other if they lost. The Eliminators would be forced to leave ECW, and their manager, Jason, would have to have his head shaved. The Pitbulls would be forced to split up, and whoever pinned one of them, they would get their manager, Francine, for a week. And if the Heavenly Bodies lost, all stipulations would be forced on them. So I get that for like what are they? I guess they're going to get their head shaved and leave ECW, fight each other or something, but how do you enforce all stipulations when some of them were managers? Like, they didn't have, I don't know. It's ECW. It's convoluted, okay? Less convoluted was WWF's pay-per-view, In Your House 5, Seasons Beatings. It was from Hershey, Pennsylvania on December 17th. Hunter Hearst Helmsley defeated Henry O. Godwin in an Arkansas hog pen match with Hillbilly Jim as a special referee. The good old hog pen match where you throw somebody in the hog pen to win. The main event of the show, WWF champion Bret Hart defeated his brother-in-law, British Bulldog, who was accompanied to the ring by Jim Cornette and Diana Smith, which was British Bulldog's wife and Bret Hart's sister. Anyway, Bret Hart kept the title. And then we go to WCW Starrcade 95. Well, obviously, it's 95, duh. They're from Nashville, Tennessee, December 27th. The 13th annual Starrcade. And this one was billed as the World Cup of Wrestling. It was a partnership that WCW had ongoing with New Japan Pro Wrestling. But anyway, they're going to have this World Cup of Wrestling where they're going to have 7 matches, WCW versus New Japan wrestlers, and then, whoever won the most would be the winners. And Sting would defeat Kensuke Sasaki, I'm probably saying that name, butchering it, who was actually WCW US champion at the time, accompanied to the ring by Sonny Ono, of course. He beat him in the final match of that to give WCW the win. They won 4 matches out of 3, so WCW won the World Cup. Ric Flair defeated Lex Luger and Sting in a triangle match, which I'm not sure if that's elimination or first pinfall wins. But anyway, Ric Flair won that to win an immediate shot at the WCW World Heavyweight title, which was held by Randy Savage, which Ric Flair won, and then defeated Randy Savage to win the title. So big night for Ric Flair. My favorite wrestler of all time. And there was a bizarre dark match that happened after the pay-per-view. Okay, like I said, Kensuke Sasaki, if that's how you say his name, and I'm not trying to be funny, I am bad at pronouncing names, especially names of non-American people, because as you can see, I can barely just speak English. But anyway, he was the U.S. champion at the time, and him and One Man Gang faced off at a title match. Well, One Man Gang did a splash and pinned him. Referee counted to 3 and didn't see Sasaki kick out. So, One Man Gang won the U.S. title. But then another referee came out and said, no, he kicked out. They restarted the match. Sasaki won to get his title back. However, I don't know what political stuff was going on between WCW and New Japan, but, the crowd seeing that Sasaki, I'm not trying to be racist or anything, I promise. I don't know how to say his last name. Anyway, the crowd seeing that he got the title back. However, WCW, when they showed it on WCW Saturday Night the next week, they only showed when One Man Gang won. They didn't show everything after. So basically, WCW was not acknowledging the title staying with him. They were acknowledging One Man Gang as the champion. So, like I said, some political stuff going on there with, between the two companies or something. I don't know. Convoluted, but not as convoluted as ECW. Speaking of them, they had one final event this month. It was called Holiday Hell, the New York Invasion, from Queens, New York on December 29th. And it was the very first ECW Supercard to happen in New York. Because almost all of them take place in the ECW Arena, which is in Philadelphia. It was the 3rd annual Holiday Hell. And it made up 2 episodes of Hardcore TV, which would air the following year, the first couple weeks of January. Mikey Whipwreck, here we go with sorry, I had to burp. With the convolution, see, I cannot speak English either. The convolution here. Mikey Whipwreck defeated ECW TV and Tag Team Champion, just one of the champions, Too Cold Scorpio, to win both titles. So somehow Too Cold Scorpio got to put, he was Tag Champions with Sandman, got to put his title on the line too. But Cactus Jack came down and helped Mikey Whipwreck win, and which Mikey didn't even realize. And Cactus declared himself as one half of the Tag Team Champions, which became official. Again, ECW. I say official like they have rules or something. The main event, Sabu won an Olympic rules match against Cactus Jack, which was supposed to be like, Olympic rules. Cactus Jack was doing this anti-hardcore thing. This was not too long before he went to WWF. He debuted at the night after WrestleMania 12, which was, I think March or beginning of April of 96. And, this is December, so, this is the end of his ECW run. But he was doing this whole, I'm anti-hardcore type stuff, to get people to hate him because they all love the hardcore stuff. And, of course, everybody thinks of Mick Foley as the hardcore guy, so doing this made them hate him even more. But, he made this an Olympic-style rules match. Well, typical ECW, Sabu's bodyguard was really Paul Heyman's, Paul E. Dangerously, I should say, as the character. He wasn't as Paul Heyman, the owner. He was Paul E. Dangerously, which Sabu's handler, manager, whatever you want to call him. But his bodyguard was 911. So he comes down to the referee and gets to be the referee, and Sabu starts using weapons and stuff, and Sabu ends up winning. But again, ECW, where else can a referee or a wrestler knock out a referee and then, I'm the referee now. But one final bit of wrestling news here. It was a big event, not an event, but a big thing that happened. On December 18th, the WWF Women's Champion Alundra Blaze, making her debut as Medusa, which was her name anywhere outside of WWF. The name that she'd been known by for years. She just became Alundra Blaze in WWF and really became a real popular wrestler there at a time when women's wrestling was not anywhere near. Not even near like now, but not even like the Divas era. I mean, the wrestling was good. I'm not comparing it to the Divas like the supermodels wrestling and barely. I use wrestling in quotations. They were good. It's just they were very few female wrestlers at the time and hardly ever on TV. But she took the WWF Women's title right after leaving WWF because our contract ran out, and put it in the trash can on WCW Monday Nitro, which was like a huge deal, which caused a lot of things to go on later on. But anyway, of course WWF deactivated the title then, and they wouldn't have a women's title for like 3 years till Sable got it. The start of the whole non-wrestler wrestlers, basically. But like I said, that caused a huge deal. That was basically one of the main reasons behind the Montreal Screwjob is, when Bret Hart was leaving the company in '97, they didn't, he was still champion, and they didn't want him to do the same thing. Bret Hart stated that he wouldn't have done it, and I don't think he would have actually done it. And they got in a lot of trouble for that too, legally. So I don't think WCW would have done that again. But, again, and that Montreal Screwjob, I always side with Vince, even though Vince is a scumbag for what he's done. I side with the company on that because, it's wrestling. You do what the boss says. It's just like any other job, unless they're making you do something illegal. You do what the boss says. It's their title, Anyway, I always side with Vince and the WWF on that one over Bret, because Bret's just been known as a whiny little baby, especially when he starts whining about Goldberg, which he has a legitimate point. He was, Goldberg did in his career, but he just never shuts up about things to the point where he just seems so whiny, even when there's things he's talking about which are, real things that shouldn't have happened. He goes to the point, it's like, shut up, Bret. Anyway, a couple more things to talk about, not too much, I promise. Some movies that came out this month, there was 3 of them that I liked. Jumanji, which I had recently talked about in my bonus episode of my top kids movies of the 80s and 90s. Jumanji was a great movie. Robin Williams, obviously. It's about a board game, which, board games were, they've always been pretty big, but during the 90s, there was like an influx of like huge board games, where today you see all those Cards Against Humanities and basically 90 ripoffs of those, and it's always the same type of thing. You got options on here, you're going to read this, it's just become stale, I think. They've, they're not even board games, but games in general have just lost their sense of imagination since the 90s, I really feel. They came out with so many different ones. They had the goofy ones like Gooey Louie, where you got to literally pull the boogers out of the head's nose. I guess that's what you call it. The guy's head's nose without making his brain come out. And not Wreck-It Ralph. That's a cartoon I don't like. Eat It Ralph's, where you got to feed this thing and try not to be the one that feeds it the last thing. It makes it throw up all the the food. But I mean, there was Mousetrap was one that was super inventive back then. But anyway, Jumanji is based on like a board game where he started playing. Robin Williams' character started playing as a boy and ended up getting sucked into the video game. And the girl he was playing with, like through years of therapy, just basically convinced herself that didn't happen. But anyway, these kids end up finding this game and start it up, so they end up getting him back. And Robin Williams comes back from where he was. He was like in a jungle. And he was like an adult. Never been around any people other than this like guy in the jungle is trying to hunt him. But really good movie. I don't care for the newer ones with The Rock and all that crap. And by the way, they came out with a Jumanji board game, and it was terrible. Like, you'd think that they could have done so much with that, but it was just boring. Me and my wife found it recently and played it once. I'll probably never play it again. It looks good on a shelf, like, we got Jumanji, but, as far as playing it, they really crap the boat. That's not a phrase. That's a new phrase, okay? They crapped the boat with that one. Then another movie came out was Dracula Dead and Loving It. It was a parody movie on like vampire movies like Dracula, with made by Mel Brooks, so you know it's going to be funny, and also starring as Dracula Leslie Nielsen, so you know that thing is going to be funny. I haven't seen that in forever. I need to watch it again, but it's, Leslie Nielsen is, especially them Naked Gun movies, he was so freaking hilarious. And making it look like he's being completely serious is what makes it even funnier. But speaking of old people, the final movie is Grumpier Old Men, which for some reason I never watched Grumpy. It's the sequel to Grumpy Old Men. I never watched that or Grumpier Old Men back then. And I have like this fascination with like old people like being funny. Like one of my favorite YouTube celebrities, if you want to call YouTube people celebrities, I guess you can for some people, but my favorite YouTube personalities, I guess is the better word, is the Angry Grandpa. Look up the Angry Grandpa show. Sadly, he passed away, but I just found him by randomly looking up funny old men, like I think it was like throwing a fit or throwing, I don't know, but anyway, the first video I seen is he got mad his wife fed his leftover roast to the cats, and he starts throwing stuff and screaming. I was hooked ever since, and I've been watching him ever since until he passed away, and I still watch his son's videos. But anyway, that's why I love like funny old men. But for some reason, I'd never gotten around to watching these movies. Well, I'd recently watched them. I think it was last year with my wife, and they're worth it. They're hilarious. Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon. And then Jack Lemmon's dad is even older. I can't remember who played him, but he's even funnier than all of them. He's making perverted jokes. But, those movies are hilarious. I want to end this week by talking about some of the kids' meals that came out, because, that was always a real popular thing back then, is to get a Happy Meal, as it was known, from McDonald's, or a kids' meal from another restaurant. If you're going out, your parents are going out to get something to eat, you want to get the kids' meal because you want the toy. McDonald's had their Totally Toy Holiday Meals, which was, they have Mattel toys, but they're like sort of miniature versions of the real things. Like, for the boys, because sometimes they would have boy toys and girl toys. They had a Fisher-Price Great Adventures Knight and Dragon set. And this was like, these were like the knights that came with, it was like oversized, I think. But the normal ones were smaller. They came with you remember those big castles, and it'd have the drawbridge and the moat and big tower where you put the knights down in it, and it had a little gate you can lift up. If anybody remembers those from the 90s, that's what those went to. And then they had a Hot Wheels car with a ramp. Like I said, a miniature version. You don't get a full Hot Wheels set with the full track. Because it's McDonald's. They can't, you're getting these toys basically for free with the Happy Meal. They can only spend so much on it. You can't expect a full toy set. It really makes you want to go out and get the full toy set, which I think was the point. A Mighty Max Skull, North Pole Explorer vehicle, and a Keyforce car for the 3 and under toys, because they always had those 3 and under toys for the younger kids, things that they couldn't possibly put in their mouth and swallow, or parts they can break off and choke on. And then for the girls, they had Holiday Barbie figurine, which again is like, not the same full-size Barbie, shorter. Polly Pocket House, Cabbage Patch Rocking Horse, Once Upon a Dream Princess figurine, and a Magic Nursery doll for their 3 and under toy. Hardee's, for their kids' meal, had a Kooky Cuckoo Kazoo. Just try to say that. But it was like these goofy, like kazoo, noise-making instruments, but they were like in the shape of funny animals. Really weird. I'm sure anybody went to Hardee's that got that, they're like, oh no. If they didn't know what was being given out at Hardee's, if they did, they stayed away. I guarantee you. No, between them and those stupid recorders that everybody seemed to have in elementary school, I don't even call that thing an instrument. The noise is just ear-splitting. Anyway, Taco Bell had The Mask, the animated series toys, based on, of course, the Jim Carrey The Mask movie. Another animated series with Jim Carrey, just like Ace Ventura. They had toys from it. They had glow-in-the-dark light switch covers, which seems really cool. Play-Doh molds, not actual Play-Doh brand, but they call it dough molds from different things in the series. Spinning tops, and also the dog from the series Milo. They had like a little removable mask you could take off of him. And then finally, Subway had figures based on the Disney movie American Tall Tale, which I don't remember ever watching. I don't think I've seen that. But yeah, that's what was going on, or coming out of the parents' wallets to pay for all that. But next week, we're going to be on episode 72. We're going back to 1990 again. We're going to October of 1990, so definitely going to be talking about some Halloween stuff. This will be our 8th trip through 1990. And at the time, I was 6 years old in first grade, and I was living with my mom and my brother Josh at my granny's house. Travis hadn't been born yet. Although he was born in... Okay, I'm trying to figure it out in my head. No, he wasn't born yet. 1990, he was not born yet. Anyway, you can tell. My brain is fried. I talk too much today. I talk too much all the time. But thank you guys for joining me anyway. You guys, the ones that keep coming back and watching or listening, seem to like it. So if you got any comments or any suggestions, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time.
And now, I predict the future. Next week, you'll be in the same time, same place, same station, for another hideous, hateful haul of horror.
Tales from the 90's never die. In our hearts they testify. VCRs and mixtape spins, where every tale begins. Tales from the crypt, marathons, wrestling wars.